It all started a few months ago when my friend Mark told me about an experimental study he had signed up for. Mark had just graduated with a psychology degree and was looking to get some research experience before applying to grad schools. When he first told me about it, I didn't think much of it. Just some harmless tests on perception and memory recall, he said. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then Mark started acting strangely. He became withdrawn and jumpy. Dark circles formed under his eyes from lack of sleep. When I asked what was wrong, he brushed it off as stress from the study. Just intense tests taking a mental toll, he claimed. I knew something else was going on. This was more than just stress. Mark was deeply unsettled about something, but refused to open up about what was really happening in that lab. Then one night I got a terrified call from Mark, begging me to come over right away. I hurried to his apartment and found him barricaded in his bedroom, clutching a knife and glancing around wildly. He stank of sweat and looked like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, he broke down crying about the study. The researcher, Dr. Keller, had been running deeply unethical experiments on manipulating brain waves to induce altered states of consciousness and unlock suppressed memories in his subjects' psyches. But something had gone horribly wrong. The experiments had unleashed nightmarish hallucinations and dangerous psychoses in Mark and the other test subjects, instead of simply retrieving forgotten memories. Vivid fantasies and lurid dreams were bleeding over into reality, overriding their senses. Some of the subjects had already gone irrevocably insane from the horrors playing out in their minds. Mark kept murmuring about the things he saw crawling on his walls, the whispers he heard calling his name at night. He was terrified of falling asleep now and being plunged back into the hellish visions from his subconscious. I told Mark we had to go to the police immediately. This Dr. Keller needed to be held accountable for damaging these poor subjects' sanity, but Mark begged me not to. He was too scared Keller might send government goons to make sure the experiment stayed secret by any means necessary. Against my better judgment, I reluctantly agreed to simply help Mark lay low while he regained some semblance of normalcy. In the meantime, I started discreetly looking into Dr. Francis Keller and his research to find something to bring him down. If I couldn't go to the police, then I'd make the creep pay myself. What I uncovered about Keller was bone-chilling. He was a protege of the CIA's notorious MK-Ultra brainwashing program back in the 1960s. After MK-Ultra was supposedly shut down due to public outcry, Keller simply continued his research independently in the shadows. His area of expertise was manipulating subjects' perceptions and memory recall to uncover repressed traumas. But Keller took these techniques to frightening extremes. He was obsessed with deconstructing and reconstructing the human psyche from the ground up. There were rumors of experimental neurotech and hallucinogenic compounds involved. His test subjects were left utterly broken mentally and spiritually, if they even survived the ordeals at all. Yet Keller eluded authorities while publishing just enough legit psychology research to maintain his academic credentials as cover. All these years he had been refining his methods in secret, waiting for the day to unleash his final masterpiece in human conditioning. And from what Mark told me, that day had now arrived. I decided Mark and I had to go public with what we knew. As we worked on a dossier to take to the press, Mark's condition worsened. His brief moments of lucidity became fewer and farther between as he sank deeper into the deranged visions from Keller's experiments. But Mark still clung to one last bit of sanity, his mortal fear of going to sleep and surrendering fully to the horrors. He begged me to watch over him and prevent him from falling asleep at all costs. I tried my best, but it was clearly a losing battle. Then one night I got the call I'd been dreading. It was from the director of a psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of town. Mark had snapped completely, murdering 3 people in his apartment building before being subdued and sent to the hospital. My heart dropped. Now locked away in that asylum, there would be nothing stopping Mark's untethered psyche from descending completely into Keller's manufactured madness. I had to see my friend. I had to know if any glimmer of the real Mark still remained, or if he was lost forever in the nightmare visions worming through his brain. The director was hesitant, but eventually allowed me access for a brief supervised visit. I steeled my nerves before entering the heavily secured ward. What I saw made my pulse quicken. There was Mark strapped tightly to a table, IV tubes snaking into his arms. His eyes darted around frantically and he thrashed against the restraints, but what unsettled me most was his mouth, bubbling up with hysterical laughter. The madness had fully taken hold. When the director left us alone for a moment, I rushed to Mark's side and grasped his hand, begging him to recognize me. He paused his delirious laughter, focusing on me with animal curiosity, before his expression turned mocking and cruel. In a voice not his own, Mark whispered that tonight the visions would come for me too, and complete what Keller had started. I recoiled in shock, just as staff ran in to subdue Mark's outbreak. As I left the hospital shaken to my core, I knew I had to stop Keller before he could subject anyone else to this waking nightmare. That maniac had to be put down. Using the most shadowy corners of the net, I eventually discovered Keller was secretly operating out of an abandoned mental asylum, ironically enough. The crumbling Kirkbride building was isolated deep in the woods, and the perfect place to continue his human experiments away from prying eyes. Before heading there, I stopped by my apartment and loaded up on anything I thought I might need to end this nightmare. Road flares, a can of gasoline, and a 9mm pistol. If diplomacy failed, I would burn that place to the ground, even if it meant taking Keller with it. As I crept through the decaying asylum hallways, faint screams and moans reverberated in the distance, evidence of Keller's latest victims having their minds peeled open. Room by room, I searched for the mad scientist, unsure if I was the hunter or the hunted. Finally, I entered a large operating theater. There was Keller himself, looming over a gurney where a young woman lay thrashing and wailing. At the sight of me, the doctor broke into a grin. He'd been expecting me, knowing I would come. I leveled my gun and ordered Keller away from the woman, but he only chuckled, explaining the gun was pointless. Her mind and psyche had already been utterly devastated beyond repair. His final, perfect masterpiece. Enraged, I fired a warning shot, threatening to destroy his life's work if he didn't surrender. The doctor's smile wavered for the first time. He reluctantly raised his hands, assuring me I didn't understand his great vision. But I had seen the end result of his vision firsthand. I thrust the can of gas in his face, ready to immolate everything. Keller's confident facade finally broke, and he begged for mercy, saying he could reverse the damage he'd done if given time. My finger tightened on the trigger, but before I could act, a blood-curdling scream rang out from the hallway outside. I hesitated at the last second, and Keller seized the opportunity to dart behind me and stab a syringe into my neck, hissing that this was my chance to truly understand. I stumbled back in shock and my vision wavered. The last thing I saw was Keller's face leering down, promising soon the real experiments would begin as he welcomed me to his world. I jolted awake, screaming and thrashing against restraints. My blurry vision slowly came into focus on a dingy room, illuminated by a flickering light bulb. I was alone and strapped to a rusted gurney, just like in Keller's operating room. Had that all been just a drug-induced vision? Where was I really? I heard movement in the dark hallway beyond the room, a shuffling and a low giggle. I strained to peer out the doorway and glimpsed a humanoid figure watching me. My blood turned to ice. Not human, just a husk that was once a man but is now host to the things slithering in Keller's opened mind. This place, wherever I was not reality anymore, but some phantom purgatory bleeding through. The figure flickered and spasmed closer. I thrashed uselessly against the restraints. A bare, dirty light bulb swung overhead, glimpses of my tormentor flashing with each swing. Closer, closer, until it was looming over me, rotting mouth twisting in a grin. It convulsed and opened its maw impossibly wide, wider than any human jaw should go. From deep inside, barely audible whispers and faint screams echoed. But not just screams. My name. Being called. The thing's mouth clamped down over my face, swallowing all light and sound. As I felt spectral hands tearing into my psyche, I sank into darkness, now just another lost soul in Keller's eternal nightmare. My final thought before oblivion: if any trace of my sanity survives this, I will find that place where Keller still draws breath and merge my nightmare with his.